Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Legal Karma podcast. I'm your host and founder of Legal Karma, Corey Kelly. This podcast isn't meant to be another legal tech updates podcast. Oh no. During our show, we'll bring on a variety of legal professionals to unpack how they're leveraging tech to scale their social justice work and close the accessibility gap in law. We'll also feature other great tech leaders from the industry who are using their software for good. Because at Legal Karma, we believe tech is poised, and in our opinion, obligated to make an impact. We're glad you're here. To learn more about Legal Karma's mission, visit us at legalkarma.org/foundation. Now let's jump in. Welcome, everyone. I am joined today by LeTonya Moore. LeTonya is the owner of 360 Brand Protection Strategy. Additionally, she's the founder of the Coalition of Black Women Lawyers and a talk show and podcast host herself. Plus, she's even written her own book, Stop Brand Stealing Thieves Now. LeTonya, I have really enjoyed getting to know you and your passion for helping other business owners, especially those who are from underserved communities, as well as the work that you've been doing with the Coalition of Black Women Lawyers. It's just an honor to have you on the show. I think you're very cool.
It's awesome to be here, Corey. Thank you.
So I'm looking forward to our conversation today on digital legal education programs and some of the work that you are doing with 360 Brand Protection Strategy and talking about the Coalition of Black Women Lawyers. But first, I could introduce you, but I always think that you guys do a better job of introducing yourself. So please tell our listeners a little about you and all of the different wonderful things you have going on.
Wow, it's kind of hard to talk about yourself, but I'll definitely give it a shot. Like you mentioned, I'm LeTonya F. Moore. I am an attorney. It's very difficult because I always think about, what do you say about yourself? And so what I would like people to know is my passion is really about not just brand protection, not just asset protection, although those things are great in the business world. It's really about assisting people in building the legacy that they want, whether it's a personal legacy, a brand legacy, and really being able to enjoy their accomplishments while they are still here, but also being secure in the fact that their children, their grandchildren are going to be able to also enjoy the fruits of their labor.
So I feel like when I talk with most attorneys and I ask, where did you find your passion for whatever sector of law you jumped into? Many of them say, "Oh, I figured it out in law school," or "This thing happened to me and it really inspired me." So I always love to ask that question. So what got you into this? There's so many things you could have studied or you could have focused in. Why this?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I first got out of law school, so my entire corporate career was serving the United States government. And one of the things that I learned in that capacity, I worked for a few different agencies, but one of the things that I learned in that capacity is just the importance of succession planning, the importance of having a really good, effectively communicated plan in place so that you can always meet the missions and objectives of your particular company. So that was one of the things that motivated me to do some of the things that we're doing with my company. The other thing is I come from a family of entrepreneurs. And so even as far back as my great grandfather, so I come from a family of entrepreneurs, but I realized that through all of those generations, there was never a business that was handed down, right? There was never any transfer of wealth, for lack of a better word. And so that really motivated me to say, I will be the first one to do that, but not just for myself, to also assist others who have that same goal.
So let's jump into that then. So your intellectual property legal education program and you'll tell me better in just a moment if it's launched or not, but this is with your actual firm, 360 Brand Protection. So I would love to just at a high level, educate our listeners so we can dive into it a little deeper on what your plan with this is. And I know from our conversation that it is meant to focus to underserved business owners. So let's definitely tap into that as well. And remember, our listeners are actually attorneys like you and other legal tech owners. So there's no need to feel like you have to sell anything or feel like you have to give like a 101. You could just talk like you're talking to your peers.
Yeah, absolutely. So this particular program, well, it's twofold. My law firm services the consulting side of my business, sort of what we talked about, what we talked about before. And so what we do is we do focus on traditionally disadvantaged groups. Right now, we have been marketing very heavily to African American women simply because that is the largest growing sector of entrepreneurs that are out there. And so what we've looked at is when we see people that have come to us, even on the legal side, some of the foundational problems that they have is their business structure isn't set up properly. That's the first thing. Or the structure that they have is not the structure that they are supposed to have based on their company type, based on the things that they are looking to do, and also based on some factors that we've developed that we believe are important so that companies can grow. We also look at if they have basic intellectual property, like basic trademarks. Is their logo trademark? Is there, if they have programs or something like that, do they have their copyrights in place? So is their intellectual property in place? And if not, we're able to provide those services, those basic services done with you, which essentially is where we teach them and work along with them. But then it's their responsibility to make sure that the filings are done. We support them that way. And then on the other end, we look at if they have any of their other items in place. So, for example, do they have like a power of attorney in place, right? In case something happens to them, who is going to handle the business of the business? And a lot of times people don't think about that. So those are the three main areas that we look at when we bring people in through the program. It is a competitive program. It is really based on income and years in business. So there's a matrix that we've developed for ourselves that will determine eligibility. And then once we determine that a person is eligible based on their particular program or their particular service needs, then we have a sliding scale that we go through based on their income, and we're able to provide the services to them at that price point.
Well, that's fantastic. And sorry if you said this already. How many rounds of this program have you done, or how many kind of cohorts have you put through this?
We've just launched. Now, this particular program, it's not cohort based. It's really just based on the number. Like, you come in, you get your services. Our project manager will work with you, or one of the project managers, whoever you're assigned to, will work with you through your process. And typically it takes about 90 days. So we've just gotten started. Our projection, let me say, is 90 days because we just launched this actually this October. So it's very, very new. We do have some people that are going through the program right now. But we haven't been 3 months in, so we don't have all of the initial outcomes yet.
And LeTonya, remind me, you're in Houston, is that right?
That's correct.
So is this a Houston-based program, and how are you kind of getting the word out about this? I feel like that's also a big issue. There's a lot of attorneys who are mission-driven like yourself who want to tap into this same thing, but I mean, just simply, marketing or getting it out there is hard. So how have you done that, especially in Houston?
Yeah, so it's a virtual program. Anyone right now, we are limiting it to the United States because that's just where all of our practitioners are. And so we want to make sure the only area that we will take in someone abroad or outside of the United States is intellectual property, because there's a requirement that you have a U.S.-based attorney if you are looking to file a trademark here in the United States. So we will take people outside of the United States just for that, but that is really the only area where we do that. So yeah, it's definitely nationwide. I guess you would say quasi international, for lack of a better word. But as far as getting the word out, where we started with a test group. That's how we have the people that we have now. So I guess you would say like this group is sort of our beta test. But what we actually did though is we looked at we keep track, for example, of the people that did not commit to services, for example. And we looked at those folks and we looked at the reasons why they did not commit. And a lot of it was the fact that they felt they couldn't afford the services. A lot of it was they felt like it was premature at the time. So we sort of created a criteria of who do we want to reach back out to. And so when we did that outreach, we got some people to apply based on that. And we also reached out to our network. I've done a good job these last 7 years of really building a network of other professionals that, you know, their services complement the services that my clients need. And so just reaching out to them, sending them information about the program and saying, hey, would you be willing to, you know, be a referral source for us? And so we've gotten people that way as well.
So I feel like talking back to those attorneys who might be listening in and they're like, yeah, this sounds great. But then the real daunting task that comes with it is the overwhelming amount of, and I'm sure this will resonate with you, administrative work that comes with it. The onboarding, the outreach, the email responses themselves can get overwhelming. So as you've jumped into this and kind of prepared for it, I'm sure in August and September, what tech did you reach for first? And of that tech, what's worked well for you so far?
Well, for us, we do a lot of email marketing. So that's really been that thing that has helped us. The other thing too, strategically, we reached out, we're only dealing with like warm leads or hot leads. So we didn't have to create that like, know, and trust factor just to be able to get people in initially. So I think that I would suggest anyone that's doing anything like this to start with warm leads, start with places where you have direct influence. As far as administrative, it really comes down to how you structure your program. I mean, for us, and you know, it's hard to say do it like this, right? Because it really comes down to how do you process intake, right? It should be really no different than how you typically would process intake, because most people that I know, and I know that we do, we have an intake criteria based on every single service line that we do. And so there's just a process that we've already created, standard operating procedures that says when someone comes in, this is sort of their, you know, this is where their life cycle starts. And these are the things that happen. And so what I would definitely suggest is before you put something like that out, you think through your standard operating procedure. How does this fit into your already existing intake process? And is there something different? For me, as far as the work, as far as the day-to-day, as far as dealing directly with the client in this regard on a regular basis, I have a project manager and an administrative person whose job it is to work this program. And so although I have oversight, there's not a lot of direct services that I'm personally providing. Although I do, you know, I touch every single matter. It's not something that is going to get a lot of my personal time.
I remember from our first conversation, LeTonya, that you mentioned that you brought up the importance of intake, and you said something along the lines of, yeah, that is the one thing everybody's got to figure out. And it's really key to figure out to be efficient. So for many listeners, maybe right now, and I think maybe you'd be surprised to know this, a lot of them are still figuring that out, or maybe haven't focused on the importance of automating that. There's a lot of options to do that. That's part of what we do at Legal Karma. What advice would you give to a new attorney who's trying to figure that out now, or maybe they're putting together a program like this now, and they're like, okay, I want to automate that intake process so we're not drowning in just this admin pool of work. What would you say to them? And then also, if you could get as technical as possible, what tools would you recommend they use if you're using a CRM, or what are ways that you've set things up that have worked really well?
Well, as far as getting as technical as possible, I'm not the most technical person, so I will definitely say that it took a while. It's taken a while. I don't even want to make it seem like I've arrived, but it's taken a while
Mhm.
for me to really fully embrace automation, not from a value standpoint, but really from a mindset standpoint. I'm not a dinosaur in practicing law, but I definitely believe in personal touch. And so I was very hesitant and resistant to automation initially. But when I really just had to sit down and look at the cost benefit analysis and really understanding where I was really losing man hours, and I wasn't getting a return on my investment in terms of, having to talk, call everybody, and we're scheduling and we're doing all of that. And so one of the things that we set up outside of a CRM and all of that. So we specifically use our project management system that we're using right now is Podio, because it gives us some things that we want to do, and it's simple enough for me to understand it. So that's sort of why we went there. And then our clients are actually able to self-schedule. So sometimes people will just want to schedule themselves. We don't have to call and schedule appointments. And so we've built in questionnaires for them to complete. And so when the questionnaires come through, our intake folks, their responsibility is looking at what did they write down. And if it's not detailed enough for us to have an idea of what's going on, then there is some outreach that happens to clarify what it is that they are looking to talk about, what it is that they need, because that's going to determine the best person who they need to be speaking with when they have their call with our company. So for us, it's really less about, let's find a tool that says it does this. We started with, what do we need and what's going to be easy for everybody involved, really essentially me, because anything that happens in the company, it has to be something that I can do and I can understand. And that just happens to be the way that, right now that things are run, because I just have to know, like, I don't want to have to call someone to figure something out. I want them to be able to, get their work done. And so it's easier when it's something that I can go in and look at, and we can exchange information that way. So that works for us.
Well, you are not alone. I feel like 80% of my job as the owner of Legal Karma is just to talk with lawyers through that mindset. And that was what you said about, you're an advocate for that personal touch. And I think that and then you mentioned, you've looked at how many man hours you're losing, and how that automation can really make your firm more efficient, or this program more efficient. And I think the big thing that has shifted is expectations from the general population and from users. Now it's maybe back in like 2005, 2008, even 2015, there was still that higher expectation to get on the phone with a customer service representative. Like, people want to talk to real people. Now, in many ways, the tech has come far enough where you almost expect to just jump on and do something online. Like, you don't want to have to call someone or get on the phone. You'd much rather use the chatbot or use the live chat system. Or in this case, rather than doing something in person with an attorney, if it's an automatable process, you'd be happy to just jump on and knock it out really quick on your own time. And I think that's a really big just shift from US citizens, or just everyday people. That kind of spectrum is now, once what was not true maybe 5 to 10 years ago is now becoming much more true, where it's leaning more on the expectation is to have really good tech in place that looks good, doesn't look like it's from 1998, which a lot of legal tech does, unfortunately. and these built-in automated processes that'll just make them have to worry less. I mean, that's what they want. They want to sign in, fill out their information, and they want it to be taken care of from there. I think in most cases, as low touch as it can be on their end is starting to be better, especially for the younger generations.
Absolutely. And for me, I found the not just the fact that, it's necessarily saving man hours, but it allowed me to have a better quality call with that initial meeting with the client. It made it, we were able to go honestly from like 1 hour initial calls to 15 minutes, which is a lot of time, right? Which means, because what that showed me is that we could actually grow the business, 400%, right? By just making a shift in how we do things. And so that's the part that sold me, right?
Yeah.
When I realized, like, well, yeah, these are things that I would rather know up front than to have to go through this at the time of the meeting, because that gives me and or whoever's doing the initial meeting, it gives us the opportunity to think about some things so that we already have a good idea of what it is that we are going to be talking to them about, and a good idea of some things and services that we will be recommending. So we don't need a lot of time. It doesn't take a lot of time for us to get there. And then, now we're able to do multiple calls within an hour versus just one.
So we've been spending a lot of time on this one part of the conversation. I want to move us into our next part, but I do have one last question. We've talked a lot about what's worked well and what you should do, and I always like to ask the question of what's been challenging. So have you, as maybe even now, as you just you're maybe hardly 2 or 3 weeks into this program, what challenges have you faced right off the bat? Maybe it's tech related, maybe it's not. And how are you mitigating some of these challenges?
I think the biggest challenge is understanding the need for follow-up. We're in the process of adjusting our follow-up schedule for this program versus how we normally would follow up with a potential client or potential customer. And so that really has been a little bit of a challenge, because this is going to require a few more touch points than we normally would do. So just figuring that out and knowing the right interval, so that you don't come off as pushy, but also, making sure that, we're making ourselves available to service the customer's needs. But that right now has been the only challenge.
So follow up as in answering questions, or follow up as in reminders, like don't forget to do this or submit this, or what are some of those things that you're following up on?
Really, all of it, all of the above, because typically in a different, outside of this program, our process for doing this is very, very different. But because this is more, like I mentioned before, this is more done with you versus done for you. There are some things that we didn't anticipate, and we just have to manage expectations so that we have to be very clear that this is done with you. It means that when you get off the phone with the project manager, like, you're the one that's doing this, not us. Those types of things need to be clear. And we didn't think about that because that's not the typical way of doing business. So it's just making some adjustments along the way.
I see. That makes sense. That's part of what we do at Legal Karma, is like the managing and it's a really common thing that we hear, is like managing the follow-ups of all the different kinds, whether it's kind of staying out of email and putting it in a message center so things are more clear and they're kind of in that client portal, but then also that managing expectations and assigning tasks. So you're not having to do some of that manual follow-up. Like once you onboard a new client, whether it's through this program or through your proper firm, you can assign a number of tasks to them, and they'll get reminders and a really clear definition of done and what they're supposed to be doing in that task. So it kind of cuts out some of that work, but that's a common thing that we hear from others as well. Um, okay, so let's move on to your work with the Coalition of Black Women Lawyers. You are the founder of this group, and we were chatting right before we started the recording, and you've talked about how people have come together and how you've inspired others to join in this, and some of the need, especially with recent events and civil unrest. So, just broadly, I'd love to just turn it over to you. Talk about this. What is it? What do you want it to be? I know it's still really early right now, but what do you see the scope of this coalition being? And maybe by this time next year, if we're October 2021, how do you hope it's changed and grown?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main premise, we really kind of revolve around three main things, and that's education, economics, and equity. And I think that those are really, when we think about some challenges, right, that we're facing right now, at least here in America, even in some other countries, I think that it really comes down to those three things. A lot of times people have challenges because it's something that they don't understand because they've never been exposed to it. And so these are some narratives, there are several narratives that we are seeking to change, to be a part of changing. We also would like to see equity across the board as it relates to, certainly socially, politically, economically. There are lots of things that are being revealed right now that I think, quite frankly, a lot of African American people have known this for generations. And I think now there are things that people are fessing up to or admitting in different processes that now it's sort of, it's open. And so what I would like to see this coalition achieve is really being the voice of educating people around the reality of things versus just what the media says it is. Not to convince people to choose a side, but just to, as you make your choice, you are making your choice with all the adequate, accurate information versus you see a soundbite or you see clickbait on on a news headline, and now that becomes, you start to make opinions based on that versus really pulling back the curtain and say, okay, what is going on? What does this really look like? And quite frankly, we also would like to be a part of bringing a face to the Black woman movement, because there's a lot of things that are happening now. We're seeing a lot of people that are saying, look, Black women as a group are just not being protected. However, we are fighting on the front lines with everybody. And I think that this is a conversation that really hasn't been had before. And so we definitely want to be a part of that conversation. We want to be a part of assisting people, again, from disadvantaged populations, especially women that are seeking to improve their lives economically, whether that's through business, whether it's through, closing the career gap. We know that there's still a pay gap between men and women. We definitely know that. We know that there is a sentiment, right, that no one wants women to lead. There are very few women that are leaders of Fortune 500 companies. And so we want to be a part of not just the conversation, but also a part of the solution to a lot of those challenges that are facing women, but especially Black women.
So when you first started sharing about this, you said something interesting that I want to come back to. You said, as people make their choice, but you didn't exactly say what that choice is. And I think that's really important. For this, and as you talk about educating people to make their choice, what is this choice?
And so the choice can be anything, right? When people make their choices, what I'm referring to is the way that you view a matter, the way that you see a situation, the way that you understand the reality of the thing, whatever that thing is. So I'll just use an example, and I'll just go back to the pay gap. I think that for a while, people never believed women when they said, well, women are paid less. I think that people didn't believe, people didn't believe women when they would say my interview was different. They were asking me about my family. They were asking me, well, are you going to have any kids? But they don't ask men those same questions. And it's almost like you have to decide what is true for yourself. And so that's a choice, right? It's a choice of what will you believe. And so for us, it's important that before you decide what you believe, that you have all the information.
Well, that's really beautifully worded. So, operationally, the Coalition of Black Women Lawyers, how does this work? Like, is it that you bring in attorneys together and you kind of have like some sort of intake tool, and whoever has capacity can take on cases, or are you doing cases? Operationally, how do you see it changing over the next year?
So as far as cases or referrals, we are in the process right now of working on that. As we spoke before, the coalition officially launched at the very end of September, the beginning of the very end of September. So we just got to work. And so one of the things, as you and I have discussed previously, is that one of our goals is to be able to provide direct services. And so right now we're looking at different ways that we could have a virtual intake process that would just send the cases and the referrals to the members of our coalition. And so that's one of the things that we are looking at putting in place. The other thing that we are looking at is what are the services that we will be providing and what will that look like? And so we're right now building out the business model for that. But essentially what I would like to see is that there is a way for people to contact the coalition when they have a legal need, and that they're able to immediately get into get into the appointment process or get into the system, so that someone can speak with them to see what their needs are and hopefully address their needs. But we're right now in the process of building out that business model.
So where do you plan on starting? If, and maybe it morphs over time, and as more people flock to the group, then you'll be able to add in, different legal services. But in your opinion, where is the most important place that the Coalition of Black Women Lawyers can start?
Right now, we are focusing on, as far as legal services, we are focusing on businesses, and we are focusing on things, right now, just because of what we're doing. We are focusing on things like voter suppression, and a lot of us are involved with other organizations that have a better system of doing this, but it's definitely something that we are looking at. So I would say like the areas of civil rights, looking at making sure that rights are protected and they are preserved regardless of, what the situation is. And so that's something that we have definitely been focused on. A few of us, including myself, have worked with different labor unions. And so we are looking to continue to do our work with labor unions, including the police union, so that, again, we want to make sure that people's rights are protected on all sides, definitely including our first responders, including our police officers as well. So those are the areas right now that are the biggest concerns for us. And so in our first quarter, which October started the first quarter of the fiscal year, we are focusing on education around all of those things.
Excellent. LeTonya, I really want to say thank you for being on the show today. You've shared a lot of wonderful wisdom and insight, and I'm really inspired by the work that you're doing. And I'm sure anybody listening to this podcast now feels exactly the same. You're a wonderful leader. Before we part, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yes, definitely. For those of you that would like to find out more about the Coalition of Black Women Lawyers, you can go to blacklawyerscoalition.com. You can see there all of our pillars, the things that we are working on. And certainly if you'd like to get involved or if you'd like to partner with us in some way, please feel free to reach out. Also, you can connect with me. I'm on every social media outlet as LeTonya Moore. So please feel free to reach out and let's connect.
Beautiful. And I would highly recommend anyone listening take LeTonya up on that offer. She is just a great person to know and a great person to connect with. If you're a first-time listener here, welcome. We're delighted that you tuned in. If you'd like to learn more about Legal Karma's products or foundation, please visit us at legalkarma.org. And if you're interested in being a guest on our podcast and sharing more about the great work you're doing, you can always reach me at Corey, Kory, Corey at legalkarma.org. Thanks for tuning in, folks.